Random House Audio presents The Power Broker, Robert Moses and the Fall of New York, by Robert A. Caro. Read for you by Robertson Dean. Introduction. Wait until the evening. One must wait until the evening to see how splendid the day has been. Sophocles. As the captain of the Yale swimming team stood beside the pool, still dripping after his laps, and listened to Bob Moses, the team's second-best freestyler, he didn't know what shocked him more, the suggestion or the fact that it was Moses who was making it. Ed Richards knew that Moses was brilliant. Even 5A Johnson, who regularly received the top grade in every course he took each term, said that Moses could have stood first in the class of 1909 if he hadn't spent so much time reading books that had nothing to do with his assignments. But the quality that had most impressed Richards and the rest of '09 was his idealism. The poems that the olive-skinned, big-eyed Jew from New York wrote for the Yale literary magazines, sitting up late at night, his bedroom door closed against the noise from the horseplay in the dormitory, were about beauty and truth. When the bull sessions got around, as they did so often, now that the class was in its senior year, to the subject of careers, Moses was always talking, quite movingly too, about dedicating his life to public service, to helping the lower classes. And just the other evening, in the midst of a desultory discussion about which fraternity's nominee should be elected class treasurer, Moses had jumped to his feet and argued so earnestly that class officers should be chosen on merit rather than fraternity affiliation, that the criterion shouldn't be who a man's friends were, but what he could do, that Johnson had said to Richards afterwards, "I feel as if I've had an awakening tonight." And now, Richards realized, this same Bob Moses was suggesting that they get money for the swimming team by deliberately misleading Og Reed. Ogden Mills Reed was the best thing that had ever happened to swimming at Yale. Since the legendary Walter Camp, athletic director as well as football coach, was hoarding the football receipts for a new stadium, there was no money to replace the dank, low-ceilinged pool, which wasn't even the right length for intercollegiate swimming events. There was no allocation from the university for travel expenses or even for a coach. But Reed, who had been Yale's first-grade swimmer, not only paid the team's expenses, but week after week traveled up to New Haven from New York to do the coaching himself. This year, after a long fight, Moses had succeeded in organizing the wrestling, fencing, hockey, basketball, and swimming teams into a minor sports association, which would conduct a general fundraising effort and divide the money among the teams, in the hope that the existence of such a formal organization would coax new contributions from alumni. The theory was good, Richards had thought at the time, but there was one hitch. Any money contributed specifically to one of the teams also had to go into the general fund. Richards doubted that Reed, who was interested only in swimming, would want to contribute to a general fund, and he wondered if the swimmers might not end up with even less money than before. But Moses had seemed to have no fears on that score, and now, standing beside the pool, Richards was beginning to understand why. Moses, dressed in suit, vest, and a high collar that was wilting in the dampness, had just announced that he was skipping practice to go to New York and see Reed, and when Richards had expressed his doubts that the alumnus would contribute, Moses had smiled and said, "Oh, that's all right. I just won't tell him it's going to an association. He'll think it's the regular contribution to the swimming team." Now, Richards said slowly, "I think that's a little bit tricky, Bob. I think that's a little bit smooth. I don't like that at all." With astonishing rapidity, the face over the high collar turned pale, almost white. Moses' fists came up for a moment before he lowered them. "Well, you've got nothing to say about it," he said. "Yes, I do," Richards said. "I'm the captain. I'm responsible. And I'm telling you not to do it." "Well, I'm going to do it anyway," Moses said. "If you do," Richards said, I'll go to Og and tell him that the money isn't going where he thinks it is." Moses' voice suddenly dropped. His tone was threatening. "If you don't let me do it," he said, "I'm going to resign from the team." "He thought he was bluffing me," Richards would recall later. "He thought I wouldn't let him resign." "Well, Bob," Richards said, "your resignation is accepted." Bob Moses turned and walked out of the pool. He never swam for Yale again. 45 years later, a new mayor of New York was being sworn in at City Hall. Under huge cut-glass chandeliers, Robert F. Wagner, Jr. took the oath of office, and then, before hundreds of spectators, personally administered the oath and handed the coveted official appointment blanks to his top appointees. But to a handful of the spectators, the real significance of the ceremony was in an oath not given. When Robert Moses came forward, Wagner swore him in as City Park Commissioner and as City Construction Coordinator, and then, with Moses still waiting expectantly, stopped and beckoned forward the next appointee. To those spectators, Wagner's gesture signaled triumph. They were representatives of the so-called good government organizations of the city, the Citizens Union, the City Club, liberal elements of the labor movement. They had long chafed at the power that Moses had held under previous mayors as park commissioner, construction coordinator, and member of the City Planning Commission. They had determined to try to curb his sway under Wagner, and they had decided to make the test of strength the Planning Commission membership. This, they had decided after long analysis and debate, was Moses' weak point. As park commissioner and construction coordinator, he proposed public work projects, and the city charter had surely never intended that an officeholder who proposed projects should sit on the Planning Commission, whose function was to pass on the merits of those projects. For 9 weeks, ever since Wagner's election, they had been pressing him not to reappoint Moses to the commission. Although Wagner had told them he agreed fully with their views and had even hinted that on Inauguration Day there would be only 2 jobs waiting for Moses, they had been far from sure that he meant it. But now they realized that Wagner had in fact not given Moses the 3rd oath and the Planning Commission job. And looking at Moses, they could see he realized it too. His face, normally swarthy, was pale with rage. The more observant among these spectators, however, noticed that after the ceremonies, Moses followed Wagner into his inner office. They knew all too well what he would be saying to the new mayor. He had said it often enough, publicly and privately, orally and in writing, to Wagner's predecessors, Vincent R. Impellitteri and William O'Dwyer, and even earlier, to the great La Guardia. "He's threatening to resign," they whispered to one another. They were right. Behind the closed doors of the inner office, Moses was putting it to Wagner straight. If he didn't get the 3rd post, he would quit the other 2, and he'd do it right now. Wagner tried frantically to stall. "The Planning Commission oath?" the mayor said. "There must have been an oversight. Some clerk must have forgotten to fill out the appointment blank. Nothing to worry about. He'd see to it in a few days." Moses walked out of the mayor's office and into the little room down the hall where a deputy mayor and his assistant were filing the appointment blanks. Snatching an unused blank off a sheaf on a table, he sat down at the table and filled it out himself. Then he walked back to Wagner's office and, without a word, laid the paper on the mayor's desk. Without a word, the mayor pulled the paper toward him and signed it. Robert Moses possessed at the time of his confrontation with Ed Richards an imagination that leaped unhesitatingly at problems insoluble to other men. The problem of financing minor sports had been tormenting Yale deans for 2 decades, and that, seemingly in the very moment of the leap, conceived of solutions. He possessed an iron will that put behind his solutions and dreams a determination to let nothing stand in their way. To form the Minor Sports Association, he, only an undergraduate, had faced up to, and had finally faced down, Walter Camp, who was implacably opposed to its formation. And he possessed an arrogance which made him
Sample complete. Ready to continue?